This lesson is over dividing polynomials using both long and synthetic division. These are concepts that you covered in Algebra 2, but we're going to refresh as we get into the polynomial chapter. Be sure that you set up your paper in Cornell Note format. Leave space for questions and summary. So before we get into long division and synthetic division, let's do a quick review. If I am dividing by 3ab in example 1, then I need to take these fractions and break them up into separate fractions. So I would say 3a squared b, the first term, divided by 3ab, plus 6a cubed b squared divided by 3ab, plus 18ab divided by 3ab. Now I'm going to actually divide. And remember, if the denominator is a single term, then you can do that. If the denominator has more than one term, do not split it up. Okay, so if I take this first fraction and divide, I'm going to divide the coefficients. 3 divided by 3 is 1, so I don't need to write the 1. But what do I do with the exponents? A squared divided by a, remember, will be a, because I'm going to subtract the exponents. And the exponent on this, if there's not one there, is understood to be a 1. Same thing for the b's. So if I do 1 minus 1, I'm going to get b to the 0, which means I don't have a b there anymore, because anything to the 0 power equals the number 1. Okay, now let's take the second fraction. 6 divided by 3 is 2. A to the third over a to the first. When I subtract my exponents, I would get a squared. And then b squared divided by b is just b. 2 minus 1 would be b to the first. Okay, and on the last one, 18 divided by 3 is 6. A divided by a is going to cancel itself out because 1 minus 1 is again 0, and a to the 0 is the same thing as the number 1. And then the same thing happens with the b's. So our answer would be a plus 2a squared b plus 6. Okay, pause the video for a second and work example 2. When you've got the answer, turn it back on. When I break it up, I'm going to say 12x squared y divided by 3x plus 3x divided by 3x. So when you divide the first terms, 12 divided by 3 is 4. X squared over x is just x to the first. And then I've got the y on the top and no y on the bottom, so 4xy. 3x divided by 3x. 3 divided by 3 is 1, which I am going to have to write this time because my x's are canceling out. So 4xy plus 1 should be your answer. Remember, when you are dividing, you must subtract your exponents. You divide the coefficients, but you subtract your exponents. Okay, now, you do not need to write this next part down. We're just going to think back to elementary for a minute, before we had any calculators, before we put in any variables in our problems. And we want to divide 5,621 by 9. So when we were in elementary first learning division, we had to set it up as a long division problem. And we would use the divisor, which is the 9, on the outside. Okay, the dividend is 5621. Be sure you write these terms down. And that went on the inside. And then we're going to divide those numbers. But when we divide, we didn't put 9 into the whole thing. We just thought, what is 9 into 56? Because 9 won't go into 5, but it will divide into 56. So 9 divided into 56 is 6. So our first step was to divide. Okay? Now, after that, we would take 6 times 9. So step number 2 is to multiply. Okay, what you got for the answer times the number, and 6 times 9 is 54. Then we would subtract. So 56 minus 54 is 2. And then we would bring down the next digit, which is the 2. And then we would start the whole process over. Okay, so we would divide again. 9 into 22 goes twice. 9 times 2 is 18. Subtract the 18 from 22 and we get 4. Bring down the 1 and we would keep going. Okay? So if we keep going here, we are going to end up with a remainder of 5. And the remainder can be written as a fraction. And we would put the remainder over the divisor. And this answer that we get right here is called the quotient. Quotient is the answer to a division problem. Okay. Okay. Now, the steps we're going to use for long division of polynomials are the same steps that we just did here. So pause the video for a second and get your steps written down. But basically, we are going to divide, multiply, subtract, bring down, and keep repeating until we run out of terms. So if you need to, pause the video to write your steps down. Now, let's look at an example. We need the divisor on the outside. The divisor in this case is going to be our x plus 2. So I'm going to have x plus 2 divided into the dividend. What we're dividing into is x cubed plus 13x squared minus 12x minus 8. You will need to use some paper on these problems. Do not try to cram them up in a tiny space or you will make mistakes that are not necessary. Okay, so first step was to divide. Okay, so step number 1, dividing, we're going to take the first term only of the divisor and divide it into the first term of the dividend. So x cubed divided by x. Okay, and that gives us x squared. And the one thing that's different is I'm going to write that over the term that we divided into instead of moving it over. Okay. Now, second step, we take the answer we just got, the x squared, and we multiply times the divisor, which is the x plus 2. And when you distribute that out, you will get x to the third plus 2x. And we're 2x squared. We're going to line that up, so x to the third plus 2x squared. Okay. Third step is to subtract. So I'm going to put in some parentheses because I'm subtracting both terms. And x cubed minus x cubed is going to cancel out, which it should if you divide it correctly. And then we're going to have 13x squared minus positive 2x squared, which will give us 11x squared. Okay, and then the step 4 was to bring down. So I'm going to bring down the next term, which is the negative 12x. Now we start the whole procedure over again. So we're going to divide the x, the first term of the divisor, into the first term of the dividend. So 11x squared divided by x would be 11x. So at the top, I'm going to put plus 11x. Okay, now I multiply. So 11x, which is the answer I just got, times the divisor, x plus 2, would be 11x squared plus 22x. And we're going to line things up. Okay. Now we subtract. So again, I'm going to put the parentheses because I'm subtracting both terms. 11x squared minus 11x squared will cancel. Negative 12x minus 22x, because I have this subtraction out here, is going to end up being negative 34x. And then I bring down the next term, which is the minus 8. And then I need to go through the process one more time. So I'm going to take the x, divide it into the negative 34x, which would be negative 34. Multiply negative 34 times x plus 2, which is negative 34x minus 68. I'm subtracting, so I'm going to put minus and parentheses because I need to subtract both terms. And 34, negative 34x minus negative 34. Remember, minus negative changes to plus positive. Okay, these are going to cancel. So then I'll have negative 8 minus negative or plus 68, which will give me a positive 60 for my remainder. I don't have anything else to bring down. So my remainder will be written as plus 60 over my divisor, which is x plus 2. Okay, here's the solution, again written out. If you need to look at it again, you can pause the video. Now I want you to try this one, so pause the video until you think you have the answer, and then start it up again, and I will put the solution up. So here is the answer you should have gotten. If you cannot find your mistake, put a question mark beside the problem, and then be sure to ask me about it in class. Okay, now long division is fine, and sometimes we have to use it, like on the second example. But sometimes we need a faster method, and there is a faster method to divide. It's called synthetic division. And again, you should have done this in Algebra 2, but if you don't remember, we're going to write the steps down again. Synthetic division is a way to get the answer without actually dividing anything. But the first thing we need to do is make sure that our exponents are in order, descending order, and all there. So if my highest exponent this time is x to the fifth, then the next thing should be an x to the fourth, x to the third, x to the second, x to the first, and no x, which is our constant. Okay, so make sure they are in order, descending order, and that nothing is missing. Okay, now all I'm going to do is write down the coefficients. So negative 5, negative 21, negative 3, positive 4, negative 2, and positive 2. And again, don't get these too close together or you will lose track of what you're doing. Okay, now I'm going to take the divisor, the x plus 4, and I want the opposite of this number. You can only use synthetic division if the x in the divisor has a coefficient of 1. If there's a number there, you need to go back to long division. Okay, so if I have x plus 4, I'm going to do the opposite, which would be negative 4, and that's what's going to go in this box. Now to start the process of synthetic division, we're going to bring down the first number. Okay, then we're going to multiply the answer that we have below the line times the number in the box. So negative 4 times negative 5 is positive 20, and I write that underneath my next coefficient or my next term, and then I'm going to add. So we're going to multiply and add all the way across. Negative 21 plus 20 is negative 1. Multiply times negative 4, which is positive 4. Then we're going to add. Negative 3 plus 4 is 1. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. And then we're going to add 4 plus negative 4 is 0. 0 times negative 4 is 0. Negative 2 plus 0 is negative 2. Multiply, and you get positive 8. Negative 4 times negative 2. And then add. 2 plus 8 is 10. Now, that's not my final answer, but those are the coefficients that go in my answer. And what I need to think about is when I started, I had a negative 5x to the fifth divided by an x, first term of the dividend and first term of the divisor. Well, if I divide an x to the fifth by an x, I'm going to get an x to the fourth. So when I put my variables back in the answer, I drop the exponent by 1, and then I'm going to just go in descending order. So if the negative 5 was an x to the fourth, the next term is an x to the third, x squared, x, then we get to the constant, and the very last term is always your remainder. So let's write this out the way it should look. So we'll have negative 5x to the fourth, minus 1x to the third, which can just be minus x to the third, plus 1x squared, plus 0x. I don't have to write the x because it's a 0 coefficient. Constant is the number by itself, so minus 2. And then my remainder, just like on long division, is going to become a fraction. So 10 divided by x plus 4. And that is my answer for the synthetic division. Okay. Now, here are the steps. This is basically describing what we just did. So I want you to write these down. There are 2 pages of these. Pause the video, get them copied, and then when you are finished, go to the next page and get those copied. Okay, now let's do this example. Okay, and again, remember, we want to start with the biggest exponent, which is x to the third, but what should come after x to the third? And that would be an x squared. I don't have an x squared, so I have to think of this as x to the third plus 0x squared. I'm going to need that number. And then I don't have an x either, so I'm going to put in a plus 0x minus 27. So when I set this up, here's the important part. I've got a 1x cubed, so it's a 1, and then a 0, 0, negative 27. If you don't put the zeros in, you will not get the correct answer. Remember, you can always check the answer to division by multiplying your answer times what you were dividing by. Okay. In the box, we need the opposite of the number in the divisor. So if it's x minus 3, I'm going to use a positive 3 in the box. Okay, from here you might want to pause and see if you get the correct answer. So I'm going to start by bringing down the first coefficient, which was the 1. 3 times 1 is 3. Add, and we get 3. Multiply, 3 times 3 is 9. Add, 0 plus 9 is 9. Multiply, 3 times 9 is 27. And then we add negative 27 plus 27 is 0. Okay, now to put our x's back in, if I started with x to the third, I need to drop my exponent by 1. So it's x squared, x constant, and the last number is always our remainder. So this time our remainder is 0. We won't need the fraction at the end. And the answer should be x squared plus 3x plus 9. Okay, now, here's one more example. Pause the video, work this one out. Don't go on until you have gotten an answer for this question. Okay, here's the answer for example 3. And notice we've got a bunch of zeros in here when we set it up. And that's because we didn't have an x to the fourth, an x to the third, an x squared, or an x. We jumped straight from x to the fifth to the constant. So we had to fill in with all those zeros. Okay? The 1 in the box is the opposite of this term in the divisor. Okay? So check your answer. If you have any questions, put a question mark beside it and ask me when you come to class.